we do have a lot of clips to get through tonight. I have sectioned it out and tried to focus in on the actual criticisms levied by Kip. And Carrier, if I miss anything that you want me to find, I can definitely, figure that out and pull it up if I happen to miss a clip. But I think that I've gotten everything. And I think that it's important at the outset to kind of, because Kip at the very beginning of his video really frames it pretty well as to where he's coming from, like when he's looking at on the historicity of Jesus and this topic in general. And I figured
you have to know at the outset that I find this quite absurd. And I don't think the book itself on the historicity of Jesus is really all that good. Frankly, much of it does not even really interest me. However, as a specialist in early Jewish history and literature, this is my wheelhouse. And importantly, one of the things that Richard Carrier attempts to do within his book is to ground his ideas about mythicism and of his model of Christian origins within early Judaism. Simply put, for his model of Christian origins to have any traction, then it must make sense within an early Jewish context. And that's what this video is about. So I'm going to repeat, I'm not critiquing Carrier's minimal Jesus myth theory, but rather what I am doing in this video is critiquing his handling of the background knowledge within Jewish literature on which he's grounded his ideas. My interest is exclusive to the first grouping, the elements of Christian origin, which comprises the first 10 of these 22 elements that appear in his chapter 4. And I'm honestly not even all that concerned with most of these 10 because they're fairly widely accepted and basically inconsequential.
Yeah, so I'm assuming that you could hear that fine, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so the first problem that I kind of have with how Kip starts the video is that he's basically saying that, like, I'm not really interested in, like, fully understanding the entire work. I'm only interested in these parts of it. And, I mean, I guess that can be fine, but it just kind of seems like it kind of seems like he's trying to start building from this position of, well, I don't really care about the actual conclusion if I can sway his foundation in early Judaism, then the rest of it just doesn't matter. Right. Yeah. I don't know. Is that what you got or no?
Right. Oh, no, I don't have a issue with that approach. I mean, because regardless of, bombast or rhetoric or how he frames things, if there's any errors in those first 10 elements in chapter 4, I want to correct them. Right. So I'm all for it. Right. Just get it right when you're critiquing me, like get what I actually said. Right. Because then it's not useful. It's just frustrating. Right. Like people complain for like an hour about something I supposedly said, and they find out by the end that I didn't say it. We've all wasted our time, right? I would like to know about things that are actual errors that I could actually correct, right? Which I do all the time. Like I do corrections quite often when they come up in all of my work. It's just usually they're not consequential corrections. And that frustrates people. They're desperate to find some serious error because they don't like the conclusion. So I think him saying it doesn't interest him. I'm pretty sure it does, because if you look at all of his social media interactions, like he's clearly got a bug up his butt about denying historicity. So that's a bit disingenuous, I think. But nonetheless, I think it's fine to frame his video that way, and let's just focus on this thing that is my wheelhouse. And yeah, that's a useful way to start, and it's certainly just for doing this one video that he's doing, right?
Mm-hmm. Now, what do you think about the? Or I guess maybe I should ask, what he's really addressing here in this video is background information. How, if somebody were to prove one of your background elements like false or not true, how would that seriously affect the outcome?
Right. Yeah. If you could knock a whole element out, like that's different than knocking out one piece of evidence out of 10 pieces of evidence for an element, right? Like that wouldn't do anything. But knocking a whole element would have the effect that we would have to reassess our probabilities. So further down the line, right? So like when you're looking at how probable is it that a sect, let's say a Jewish sect, would come up with this idea of a celestial death and resurrection that will solve all their problems, right? That being probable requires that to fit the background. And so that's why usually, we're going to get into it later, but usually you find Christian resurrection apologetics hinges on Jews never believed in a dying Messiah. Therefore, Jesus had to have been really resurrected, because only a real resurrection would convince Jews that he was the Messiah, right? Because Jews are so against a dying Messiah. They would never believe it. That's the usual line. And if that were true, it would be a valid point, because you'd say like the probability of that happening would then have to be low, or lower in any case. But that goes away if there's evidence that this is actually an entirely plausible thing for Jews to do. And it's important for the element we're going to talk about later to note that in the element, it's an or statement. It's a logical or statement, where I say like, either there were pre-Christian Jews who believed this, or it's entirely plausible that some would, right? And so that's really, it's because that's a modal argument, and it's different than the factual argument. And so you'd have to knock out both of those. It wouldn't be enough to knock out one of them, because that's when you're talking about probability, plausibility is a key factor there. So if it was implausible, then it would be improbable. But if it was plausible, then that argument that they would never do it is gone. So that's how it would affect the probabilities down the line for any of these elements if you could knock them out. Some of them would have lesser effect than others. But if you go through it, you can kind of tell which ones matter more than others. But that's the role of these things. They themselves, the elements themselves, are true regardless of whether Jesus existed or not. None of this is evidence that Jesus didn't exist. So the idea that Jews had a pre-Christian idea of a dying Messiah has nothing to do with whether Jesus existed or not. That could just as easily explain how a historical Jesus would be crowned the Messiah after dying, as it would be to explain a sect finding a hidden message in the scriptures about a dying Messiah, right? And then believing that it happened secretly and the visions told them it, right? Both of these things are equally probable on that evidence. So that evidence doesn't prove or disprove or increase or decrease the probability of Jesus existing or not, right? So that all the elements are like that. None of them are evidence against the historicity of Jesus, but they are all things that your model of Jesus has to take into account. Whether it's historicist or mythicist, your theory has to be compatible with those elements, and that's the key factor that matters.
Right. I totally agree and understand. So next we're going to move on to Kip had some minor problems with a couple. He said at the very end of that last clip that like, well, a lot of these elements I don't care about because they're inconsequential, right? Because they're apparent, they're scholarly consensus. Like these are positions that are, right. Which I think is a little funny. It's a little whiplashy there, that intro, because he's like, the book's not good, but also majority of it is like scholarly consensus. Yeah.
Like, well, I imagine I'm seeing it from his point of view, from his POV. Maybe he thinks I'm hiding like little tricks inside a menagerie of true facts, right? Like I have all this innocuous stuff he says it's so true, it's trivial, right? And then so maybe he fears that I'm like hiding little like devils in the briars, right? It's just something like that. That I'm trying to like pass off these bogus elements in a sea of true elements. I think that might be the kind of thing that he's thinking is happening, and that's a genuine thing to look for. Like someone could do that. So I'm not objecting to his methodology yet. In the clip. So.